Good morning. I'm recording this video because many of you have been asking for more specificity with the personal TED Talk, and I just want to clarify some things. So TED stands for thought, emotion, desire. At the moment of conception, we inherit a limiting belief or a limiting thought package, so to speak, from our parents. Whatever they were thinking about themselves at their moment, their limiting beliefs was passed on to you. So that's the T perspective. The E is pregnancy. During pregnancy, you got emotion that is attached to that thought. That thought is considered an impure thought because it's not divine. It's linked to the D, which is desire, lust, envy, gluttony, greed, all of the vices that we get when we inherit a body, D for desire, at birth. And then to sort of sum all of that up, we get a low-level consciousness. The low-level consciousness is to say we belong to this family. This is how we do things. This is our limited thought. This is our emotional package. These are the desires that this body came with. We spend our life trying to pretend we are not that. When we create conflict, any conflict from 1 to 10, all we're trying to do is pretend we are not exactly that we don't have those low limited impure thoughts from conception, that we don't have that emotional state from pregnancy, that we don't have a desirous body attached to the same desires, addiction and lust and gluttony and greed as our parents did. So we try to pretend we are not them. That's why we look at the bad buckets. Everything in the bad buckets is linked to low-level consciousness, thought, emotion, desire. Why is that considered low-level consciousness? Why are the thoughts impure and emotions impure and desire impure? Because it's the earthly part of us. It's not the divine part of us. The divine part of us is what we're here in this lifetime to do and discover. We can only do that if we understand why we create conflict that keeps us from seeking our divine will, our divine purpose. Our entire purpose in this lifetime is to raise our consciousness from conception this much. This is called a decanat, a tenth. That's it. You don't stray from those impure thoughts, limiting thoughts, emotions and desires and low-level consciousness all that much. So when you're on your return home and you start integrating and dethroning your parents, what you realize is, oh, I've always been them. I have all of that in the good and bad buckets, but I'm doing it just a little bit differently. That was the purpose of your lifetime. So why do we do the TED Talk? The TED Talk is to identify that we create conflict on a scale of 1 to 10. Anything that's a disturbance is conflict in the psyche. And the purpose is to use our fire. If we keep our fire tied up in that low-level thought, emotion, and desire with the conflict, then the fire that we have, the only element that we can use to transmute that thought, emotion, and desire to live our divine nature and not stay stuck to that earthly low-level nature is the fire element. That's what's called transmuting beliefs, sort of purifying those impure thoughts, that decanat or that tenth. You need fire to move forward, to get out of that manger, so to speak, that you were born into. So what we do is we have a conflict statement. We tend to get very caught up in the story, and that really is earthly consciousness. We're trying to use the story to identify our spiritual consciousness. So in one sentence, list the conflict statement. That's it. My husband mistreated me and I felt disrespected. That's it. The first question of the TED Talk is linked to the impure thoughts. You got your impure thoughts from the moment of conception from mom and dad. So that's why the first question is, does that conflict statement link to mom or dad? So move away from my husband disrespected me, who disrespected me, or who disrespected themselves. Try to use a generality around the conflict statement. You also want to give the conflict statement a number, a conflict number from 1 to 10. Most of us create high-level conflicts, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. The more conflict, the higher the number, the less fire is left for us to live our divine purpose. Because at the root, we have not forgiven ourselves or think we have permission to leave the manger, to leave the low-level consciousness, to leave our family unit. It is programmed in our psyche that we have to stay in that beehive. And so if we create conflict, we stay there, we're loyal to the parents that we say we don't want to be loyal to, but we do. That is the purpose of creating the conflict at such a high level number. So the TED Talk starts to show you that a conflict 2 or a conflict 8 gives you the same emotional hit, which is to prove mom and dad right, that you are low level thought, consciousness, emotion, and desire, just like them. But if you create less conflict, a 2 or a 3, then you have, let's say, a 7 left to go live out your divine will. So you're still honoring mom and dad. You always have to honor them and identify that they gave you thought, emotion, desire, and low-level consciousness. Great. Create smaller low-level conflict so that you still have fire to come do your divine work. You meet your earthly needs and your spiritual needs. You're the earthly defective man, flawed human, but you still come to do your divine work. So as you do the TED Talk repeatedly over and over and over, and you realize that every conflict is simply to remind you that you come from that low-level consciousness, that they gave you a thought pattern, an emotional attachment, a desires body that's flawed, and that you still have permission to do your divine will despite all that. You get out of victimization, you shatter your snow globes of delusion and victim, and you move into the world with your divine will and purpose. You're still flawed, you're still human, you're still part of that family unit, but you don't have to constantly reiterate and punish yourself for having chosen that low-level consciousness. So when you do the TED Talk, first have a conflict statement, one sentence that sums up the problem, and give it a number. The T, does that conflict statement represent mom or dad? It could be both, but it's usually one repeated. That parent that continuously shows up in that question tends to be the shadow or the bad bucket that you pretend you are not. You are exactly that. You will get there. But first you have to see the pattern repeatedly show up. The second question is, what don't I like about the conflict statement, the person, place, thing, or situation that's causing the conflict? The answer to this question is what you don't like about yourself. If you go a bit deeper and you say, have I been that? Am I currently that? Or have the potential to be that in the future? And the answer will always be yes. It shows you why you're stuck, that you don't just want to be a human being with flaws, that you're still beating yourself up because you have a judgment about being that exact thing. And the third question is, what does it prove about you when you are number 2? Or what need does it fulfill when you are number 2? It fulfills a need to prove that you are exactly like your parents, that you are low-level consciousness, that you are low-level impure thoughts, that you are emotions, and you have desires in your body. And so that TED Talk is to show you over and over and over again that you just want to prove that you're not enough. Why? Because when you were 0 to 7, some lived experience of shame, of blame, of fear, of trauma, your parents did not meet your needs or love you unconditionally. So therefore, the TED Talk shows how you're perpetually trying to prove them right, that you're not enough, that you're not lovable, that you're not worthy. This starts to create the ego and the personality. The ego means I am separate from you. And the personality is, let me put on a mask or a persona to get validation or protection or safety or love in this world. When you move into individuation after the TED Talk, and you start using your fire appropriately, you start identifying that, yes, despite your low-level thoughts, low-level consciousness, emotions, and desires, you still are deserving to individuate and follow your soul's journey and use that fire to raise the consciousness from the moment of conception. Then your will is supported by the ego and the personality. You absolutely need to move into the world with knowing that you're separate and that you have a personality and how you're going to show up in circumstances. But now the three work together. And so you're no longer self-destructing. This tends to be when the conflict number tends to go smaller and smaller. So now with a 2-level conflict, you have 8 fire left to move forward in the world. But that 2-level conflict still confirms to you that you're exactly your parents as you are. It reminds you that you're human and flawed. It reminds you that you have impure thoughts, as we all do. But you don't have to beat yourself up for the impure thoughts about your gluttony, your greed, your pride, your envy. You simply sit in a space of acceptance that you are human, flawed, have a desirous body, a low-level consciousness, emotions and impure thoughts that are just part and parcel of being born and being human and being in the world. So you don't try to not be that, but despite that, you too can reach Christ consciousness or Buddha consciousness. Thank you.